The notification on the dashboard of our Audi Q8 didn't just display a message. It displayed the end of my life as I knew it. It was a simple text, 3 words from a number saved as Client Mark. But the intimacy of the phrasing cut through the silence of our drive home like a serrated blade. I didn't scream, and I didn't swerve. I just stared at the road, realizing the woman applying lipstick in the passenger seat was a stranger I had shared a bed with for 7 years. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet devastation of betrayal and the stories that hide behind closed luxury doors, stay with me. There are truths in this unraveling that we need to face together. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. The silence in the cabin of the Audi Q8 was absolute, hermetically sealed against the freezing wind whipping off Lake Michigan. Inside, the climate control was set to a perfect 70 degrees, and the leather seats smelled of faint vanilla and expensive detail. Lucas Bennett kept his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, his knuckles white not from the grip, but from the effort it took to keep his blood from boiling over. Beside him, Elena was humming. It was a soft, absent-minded sound, the kind a woman makes when she feels entirely secure in her world. She was scrolling through her phone, the blue light illuminating her high cheekbones and the diamond studs he had bought her for their 5th anniversary last week. "Robert was so impressed with your speech tonight, Luke," Elena said, her voice light and airy. "He told me the Skyline project is practically yours. We should celebrate. Maybe that Italian place on Rush Street?" Lucas stared straight ahead at the ribbon of asphalt illuminated by his headlights. "I'm not hungry," he said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, detached, mechanical, like a recording. "You're always too hard on yourself," she sighed, locking her phone and placing it face down on him, the center console, right next to his gear shift. "You need to learn to relax. We have everything we ever wanted." "We," the word tasted like ash. 10 minutes ago, while Elena was in the powder room at the gala, Lucas had been holding her clutch. She had asked him to hold it while she fixed her dress. Her phone tucked inside had lit up. It wasn't a text. It was a preview of a photo drop via AirDrop, accepted automatically because of her settings. The thumbnail was small, but the resolution on the iPhone 15 was unforgiving. It was a photo of Elena. Not the Elena sitting next to him in a bespoke gown, but Elena in a hotel room he didn't recognize, wearing a shirt that wasn't hers. The caption attached to the file transfer was simple: "For your eyes only. Can't wait for him to leave on the Tokyo trip." The sender was Robert, his mentor, his boss, the man who had toasted to their happiness 2 hours ago. Lucas merged onto the highway, the city skyline retreating in, the rearview mirror. He could feel the bile rising in his throat, a physical rejection of the reality he was currently inhabiting. He wanted to scream. He wanted to pull the car over, drag her out into the snow, and demand to know how long she had been laughing at him. He wanted to shatter the windshield with his fist, but he didn't. Lucas Bennett was an architect. He understood load-bearing structures. He knew that if you applied too much pressure to a compromised foundation too quickly, the whole building collapses on top of you. And he refused to be the one buried in the rubble tonight. "Lucas?" Elena touched his forearm. Her hand was warm. He flinched, a microscopic movement, but she felt it. She pulled her hand back. "Is something wrong? You've been weird since we left the venue." "Just tired," Lucas lied. The lie came easily, a defensive wall erecting itself brick by brick. "Headache." "You work too hard," she soothed, oblivious. He looked at her then, just for a second while stopped at a red light. He took in the curve of her neck, the way her hair fell over her shoulder, the practiced concern in her eyes. He realized with a terrifying clarity that he was looking at a complete stranger. The woman he loved didn't exist. She was a fabrication, a facade designed to distract him while the theft occurred. He didn't cry. Tears were for loss, for grief. This wasn't loss. This was a reveal. You don't cry when you find termites in the wood. You call the exterminator. "I'm dropping you off at the penthouse," Lucas said, the light turning green. "Dropping me off?" Elena frowned. "Where are you going?" "The office," he said. "I forgot the blueprints for the Tokyo proposal. I need to get them before the flight tomorrow." "Can it wait? It's midnight." "No," Lucas said. "It can't wait." He drove the rest of the way in silence. When he pulled up to the curb of their building, the doorman stepped out. Lucas didn't unlock the trunk. He didn't get out to open her door. Elena lingered for a moment, sensing a shift in the atmospheric pressure of their marriage but unable to pinpoint the source. "Don't be too late," she said, leaning in as if to kiss him. But he turned his head to check the side mirror, and her lips brushed his cheek. "Good night, Elena," he said. She paused, the cold air rushing in through the open door. "Good night?" "Go inside," he commanded softly. She hesitated, then stepped out, closing the door with a solid thud. Lucas watched her walk into the lobby, her silhouette framed by the golden light of the entrance. As soon as the glass doors slid shut behind her, he put the car in drive. He didn't turn toward his office. He turned toward the South Loop, toward the gritty industrial district, where the trains rattled overhead and the rent was cheap. He dialed a number on his hands-free system. It rang 4 times before a groggy, raspy voice answered. "Luke, it's midnight. Is someone dead?" "Not yet," Lucas whispered, his voice finally cracking, the tears he had held back threatening to spill now that he was alone. "I'm coming over, Julian. I know about Robert." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, a silence so heavy it felt like a confession. "Okay," his brother said, his voice dropping an octave, stripping away the sleep. "Come over. But Lucas, whatever you think you know, it's worse." Lucas ended the call with Julian and stared at the dashboard clock. 12:14 a.m. The exit for the South Loop was approaching, but a cold, hard logic washed over him, overriding the instinct to run. If he went to his brother's now, he would arrive as a refugee, a man fleeing a disaster. Lucas Bennett did not flee. He managed projects. He mitigated risks. He spun the steering wheel, cutting across 3 lanes of traffic to take the Wacker Drive exit, heading back toward the penthouse. He wasn't going to Julian's empty-handed. He was going to retrieve his life before he burned the bridge. The elevator ride up to the 45th floor was silent. When the doors slid open directly into their foyer, the apartment was dim, lit only by the ambient glow of the city grid outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Elena was in the living room, curled up on the B&B Italia sofa, a glass of red wine in her hand. She had changed into a silk robe, the one he had bought her in Milan. She looked up, smiling, though the smile faltered when she saw his face. It wasn't angry. It was blank, a void where her husband used to be. "You're back early," she said, setting the glass down. "Did you get the blueprints?" Lucas didn't answer. He walked past her, the soles of his dress shoes clicking rhythmically on the polished concrete floors. He went straight to the master bedroom, pulled his Rimowa carry-on from the closet, and opened it on the bed. "Lucas?" Elena appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed, clutching the silk tight across her chest. "What are you doing?" He moved with efficient precision. 3 suits, 5 shirts, underwear, toiletries, his passport, the external hard drive containing his portfolio. "Lucas, talk to me. You're scaring me." Her voice pitched up, a tremor of genuine fear entering the performance. She walked over and reached for his arm. He stepped back. He didn't shove her. He simply removed himself from her space as if she were a piece of furniture he was navigating around. "I know about Robert," he said. His voice was conversational, flat, as if he were discussing the weather. The silence that followed was violent. Elena froze, her mouth slightly open. For a second, he saw the calculation behind her eyes, the rapid mental shuffling of lies, excuses, and denials. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, attempting a laugh that sounded like choking. "Robert? Your boss? Lucas, you're exhausted. You're imagining things." Lucas stopped packing. Yeah, reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and opened the image. The timestamp, the sender, the hotel room. He turned the screen toward her. "AirDrop leaves a digital footprint, Elena, even when you think you're being discreet." Elena looked at the screen. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale and ghostly under the recessed lighting. She didn't look at the photo for long. She looked at him, searching for the rage, the tears, the heartbreak that would allow her to comfort him, to manipulate him, to beg for forgiveness. She found none of it. "Lucas, wait!" She lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the suitcase. "Please, it's not..." It was a mistake. One time. We were drunk. It meant nothing. He came on to me. It wasn't one time, Lucas said, zipping the bag shut. The sound was final, like a body bag being closed. And I don't care. You don't care? She recoiled, stung. Tears began to spill now, messy and loud. How can you say that? We've been together 7 years. You can't just leave. We need to talk about this. I love you. You love the lifestyle, Lucas corrected her, lifting the suitcase off the bed. And you love the attention. You don't love me. If you did, you wouldn't be sleeping with the man who signs my paychecks. Where are you going? She blocked the doorway, sobbing openly now, her composure shattered. You can't leave me here. What will I tell people? Lucas paused. That was it. The core of her fear. Not the loss of him, but the loss of the narrative. Tell them whatever you want, Lucas said. He looked at her one last time, observing her hysteria with the detachment of a scientist observing a specimen. Tell them I'm the villain. It doesn't matter anymore. He walked past her, brushing her shoulder. She grabbed at his jacket, but he kept moving, his momentum carrying him through the living room, past the wine glass, past the view of the city he had helped build. Lucas! She screamed his name, a raw, jagged sound that bounced off the minimalist walls. If you walk out that door, we are done. He didn't look back. He pressed the elevator button. The doors opened immediately, as if the building itself wanted him to escape. He stepped in and pressed L. As the doors closed, cutting off the sight of his weeping wife collapsing onto the floor, Lucas checked his pulse on his wristwatch. It was steady, 70 beats per minute. He felt absolutely nothing, and that terrified him more than the pain ever could. He walked out to the car, threw the bag in the passenger seat where she had sat 20 minutes ago, and dialed Julian again. I'm on my way, Lucas said, and I'm not coming back. The Audi Q8 looked obscene parked on Wabash Avenue. It sat under the flickering yellow sodium light of a street lamp, a sleek $60,000 shark beached among rusted sedans and delivery trucks. Lucas locked it, checking the handle twice, a reflex from a life where security was guaranteed by doormen, not by luck. He looked up at the building. It was an old textile factory converted into lofts, the kind with exposed brick that real estate agents called authentic and residents called drafty. The L train rattled overhead on the elevated tracks, a rhythmic metallic screech that vibrated in Lucas's teeth. He buzzed 3B. The door clicked open immediately. No intercom check. Julian had been waiting. The stairwell smelled of old rain and turpentine. Lucas climbed to the 3rd floor, his cashmere coat heavy on his shoulders, his suitcase bumping awkwardly against the metal railing. When he reached the landing, the door at the end of the hall was ajar, spilling a slice of warm, dim light onto the concrete floor. Julian stood in the doorway. He was wearing a frayed gray t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair messy, dark circles carved deep under his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a decade. He looked at Lucas, then at the suitcase, and let out a breath that was half sigh, half groan. You actually did it, Julian said, his voice rough. I thought you'd turn around at the bridge. I had nowhere else to go, Lucas said, the admission tasting like copper in his mouth. Julian stepped aside. Come in. Don't mind the everything. The apartment was a single large room, cluttered with the debris of a life being rebuilt. Stacks of books on philosophy and mechanics served as side tables. A half-disassembled motorcycle engine sat on a tarp in the corner, smelling of oil and grease. The walls were bare brick, unadorned by art or photos. It was the antithesis of the curated white box gallery Lucas lived in. It was messy, ugly, and undeniably real. Lucas set his suitcase down near the door. He felt oversized here, too polished, too stiff. He walked to the window, watching a train blur past, the sparks flying from the tracks. You want water? Coffee? Julian asked, moving to the kitchenette. He didn't offer alcohol. They both knew why. Julian had been sober for 18 months, a fragility that Lucas usually monitored with judgment. Now the judgment was gone. Water, Lucas said. Julian handed him a chipped mug filled with tap water. Their fingers brushed. Julian's hand was calloused, stained with grease. Lucas's hand was manicured, shaking slightly. She admitted it, Julian asked, leaning back against the counter, crossing his arms defensively across his chest. He wasn't looking at Lucas. He was looking at a spot on the floor. "She didn't have to," Lucas said, staring into the mug. "She tried to gaslight me, said I was imagining it. Then she switched to begging. It was pathetic." "Elena is a survivor," Julian muttered. "She shifts shapes to fit the room. You know that." "I thought I knew her." Lucas took a sip of the water. It tasted metallic. "I thought I knew my life, Julian. I just secured the Skyline contract. I was on top of the world. 3 hours ago. Now I'm sleeping on my little brother's futon." "The Skyline contract," Julian repeated, the words sounding sour. He rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous tic Lucas recognized from when they were kids, right before Julian would confess to breaking a window or stealing cash. "Yeah, Robert gave the toast." Lucas let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Robert, the man who's sleeping with my wife." Julian flinched. It was a visceral reaction, his shoulders tightening as if he expected a blow. He turned away, pretending to rearrange some papers on the counter. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a static that had nothing to do with the train tracks outside. "Lucas," Julian said, his back to him, "you need to sleep. You look like hell." "I can't sleep. My mind is racing. I need to figure out when it started. How long I've been the joke." "Don't," Julian warned sharply, turning around. His eyes were wide, panicked. "Don't go digging tonight. Just let it be for tonight." "Why?" Lucas narrowed his eyes. The architect in him sensed a structural anomaly. Julian wasn't just sympathetic, he was terrified. "You said on the phone that it's worse. What did you mean, Julian?" Julian opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at the motorcycle engine in the corner, then back at his brother, the successful, perfect brother who had bailed him out of rehab twice, who had paid off his debts, who had always looked down from his ivory tower with pity. Now the tower had fallen, and Julian was the only one holding the blueprint of the ruins. "It's late," Julian said, his voice trembling. "Take the futon. We'll talk in the morning. I promise. Just, not tonight." Lucas watched him for a long moment. He saw the guilt etched into Julian's features, deeper than the addiction ever was. "Okay," Lucas said softly. "In the morning." He sat down on the futon, still in his suit, and listened to the city scream outside, the window unaware that the silence inside the room was far more dangerous. Morning in the South Loop did not break gently. It crashed through the windows with the color of wet cement and the sound of grinding metal. Lucas woke up with a stiff neck, the wool of his suit trousers itching against his skin. For a disorienting second, he reached across the futon for Elena, but his hand hit the cold, rough fabric of a stranger's blanket. Memory returned like a physical blow to the chest. He sat up. Julian was already awake, sitting at the small kitchen island, staring into a black mug. The air smelled of burnt coffee and impending doom. "You didn't sleep," Lucas said, his voice raspy. He stood up, trying to smooth the wrinkles in his dress shirt. He felt grimy, a layer of emotional residue clinging to him that a shower wouldn't wash away. "Couldn't," Julian muttered. He didn't look up. "There's coffee. It's bad, but it's caffeine." Lucas walked to the counter. He took the mug. Julian pushed toward him. The steam rose, curling in the cold draft of the loft. He took a sip. It was bitter, acidic. It woke him up. "Talk," Lucas said. He didn't lean against the counter. He stood straight, assuming the posture of the architect, the man who inspects the site for flaws. "Last night you said it was worse. How can it be worse than my wife sleeping with my boss?" Julian finally looked at him. In the gray morning light, Julian looked older, his features sharpened by a guilt that had been eating at him for years. "It didn't start last week, Luke," Julian said quietly, "and it didn't start a year ago." Lucas felt a cold prickle at the base of his spine. "What are you saying? Do you remember how you met Elena?" "Of course, the gallery opening in River North, 7 years ago. She spilled champagne on my jacket." "She didn't spill it," Julian said. "She threw it." Lucas frowned. "Accidents happen, Julian. What is this?" "It wasn't an accident, and she wasn't there for the art." Julian took a deep breath, his hands gripping his mug so hard his knuckles turned white. "Robert sent her." The room seemed to tilt. The sound of the train passing outside faded into a dull roar. Robert? Robert needed you, Julian said, the words rushing out now, a dam breaking. You were the prodigy, the fresh talent out of Yale, but you were thinking of starting your own firm. Remember? You had the investors lined up. You were going to leave Vance & Associates. Lucas nodded slowly. He remembered that ambitious 27-year-old version of himself. He had been ready to conquer Chicago on his own terms. Then he met Elena. They fell in love fast. She convinced him that security was better for a family. She urged him to accept Robert's partnership offer. Elena was Robert's assistant before she was a gallery director. Julian continued, his voice monotone. That was her job, to manage you, to keep you happy, keep you focused, and keep you at the firm. The marriage, it was the retainer fee, Luke. Lucas set his mug down. He missed the coaster, and the ceramic hit the laminate counter with a loud clack. You're lying. That's insane. That's paranoid. Is it? Julian stood up, walking over to a drawer. He pulled out a crumpled envelope and tossed it onto the counter. Open it. Lucas stared at the envelope. His hands shook as he picked it up. Inside was a bank statement, a transfer of $50,000, dated 5 years ago, from a shell company Lucas recognized from the firm's ledger. What is this? That's the price of my silence, Julian whispered. Tears were standing in his eyes now. 5 years ago, I saw them at a bar in Wicker Park. They weren't hiding it then. I confronted Robert. I told him I was going to tell you. Lucas looked at his brother, the horror dawning on him. And Robert reminded me that I owed 40 grand to some bad people in Cicero, Julian said, his voice cracking. He said he could make the debt go away, or he could let them break my legs. And he said if I told you, he'd ruin your career anyway. So I took the money. I sold you out, Luke. I sold you out to save my own skin. Lucas didn't speak. He couldn't. The betrayal wasn't a single event. It was the atmosphere he had been breathing for a decade. His marriage was a corporate strategy. His brother's safety was a bribe. His entire life, the penthouse, the awards, the happiness, was a stage set constructed by Robert Vance, with Elena as the lead actress and Julian as the paid-off stagehand. He looked at Julian. He should have been angry. He should have punched him. But he felt a strange, terrifying hollowness. The foundation of his life hadn't just cracked. It had never existed. He had been building castles on quicksand. Get out, Lucas whispered. Luke, please. Get out, Lucas roared, the sound tearing through the loft, raw and animalistic. He swept the coffee mug off the counter, sending it shattering against the brick wall. Brown liquid splattered like old blood. Julian flinched but didn't argue. He grabbed his keys and a jacket. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. I wanted to tell you every day, Julian said softly, but I was weak, and you were so happy. The door closed. Lucas was alone in the silence, standing amidst the shards of cheap ceramic, realizing that for the first time in his life, he was completely, utterly free, and it felt like dying. The silence in the loft after Julian left was different from the silence in the penthouse. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, like the air in a room moments before a backdraft. Lucas sat on the floor, his back against the rough brick wall. The shattered mug lay a few feet away, a jagged constellation of ceramic on the concrete. He stared at it, but he wasn't seeing the mess. He was replaying 7 years of his life, frame by frame, applying a new filter, the transaction. He remembered the weekend in the Hamptons where Elena had surprised him with tickets to the opera. Was that a gift or a bonus she earned for keeping me compliant during the merger negotiations? He remembered the night he wanted to quit Vance & Associates to start his own studio, and how Elena had cried, terrified of the risk, begging him to stay for their future. Was that fear, or was she reading a script Robert had handed her that morning? The nausea returned, violent and sharp. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was humiliation on a cellular level. He felt like a lab rat that had mistaken the maze for a home. Lucas pulled his laptop from his bag. He opened it, the screen glowing blue in the dim room. He logged into the firm's cloud server. There it was, the Skyline Museum project. The folder was massive, containing gigabytes of renderings, CAD files, and structural calculations. He stared at the file. Name, Bennett, sure skyline, final.dwg. A terrible thought took root in his mind, cold and parasitic. Did I even earn this? If his marriage was a lie, if his brother's loyalty was a bribe, then what about his career? Was he actually a genius architect, or was he just Robert Vance's pet project? Had Robert handed him the Skyline contract not because the design was superior, but because it was the easiest way to keep the golden goose laying eggs? Lucas's finger hovered over the trackpad. He highlighted the entire project folder. Delete. The confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to permanently delete these items? This action cannot be undone. His hand trembled. It would be so easy to erase it all, to burn the firm's future to the ground, to disappear. He could go to the airport right now, fly to somewhere without skyscrapers, and never draw another line again. He closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw the lines of the museum. The way the cantilevered roof caught the morning light, the tension of the steel cables, the elegance of the load path. Elena hadn't drawn those lines. Robert hadn't calculated those loads. I did. Lucas opened his eyes. The trembling in his hand stopped. The architecture was real. The art was real. It was the only thing in the equation that hadn't been touched by their lies. They had used his talent, yes. They had exploited it, packaged it, and sold it. But they hadn't created it. He wasn't a fraud. He was a weapon they had forgotten to unload. He moved the cursor away from the delete button. Instead, he opened a new window. He navigated to the firm's internal communication logs, the ones he had access to as a senior partner. The ones he usually ignored because he was too busy creating. He remembered Julian's words about the bank transfer. Shell company. If Robert was paying off drug dealers in Cicero to keep Julian quiet, where was that money coming from? Robert was wealthy, but he wasn't liquid enough to hemorrhage cash without a paper trail. Lucas began to type. He wasn't looking at design specs anymore. He was looking at billing codes. He was looking at the miscellaneous consulting fees attached to the Skyline project. The grief that had been crushing his chest began to harden. It cooled, crystallizing into something sharp and dangerous. He didn't want to die anymore. He didn't want to run. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He had 17 missed calls from Elena, 3 from Robert. He didn't block them. He wanted them to call. He wanted them to think he was broken, weeping in a hotel room somewhere, confused and helpless. Let them think the structure had collapsed. They wouldn't see the demolition charges until he blew the detonator. Lucas stood up, stepping over the broken mug. He needed a shower. He needed coffee. And then he needed to go to work. Vance & Associates occupied the top. 3 floors of a steel and glass tower on Wacker Drive, a monument to transparency that hid everything that mattered. Lucas walked through the double doors at 9 a.m. sharp. He wore the same suit from the night before, but he had showered at a gym down the block and shaved. He looked tired, yes, but he didn't look broken. He looked like a man burying himself in his work to avoid going home. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, looked up and froze. The office gossip mill moved faster than fiber optics. They all knew he had left the gala early. They likely knew Elena had called the office 5 times looking for him. "Mr. Bennett," Sarah stammered, we didn't expect you in today." "The Skyline proposal is due in 48 hours, Sarah," Lucas said, walking past her without breaking stride. "The building doesn't build itself." He walked down the long corridor lined with architectural models. Every eye followed him. He could feel the weight of their pity, heavy and suffocating. He ignored it. He reached his corner office, closed the door, and engaged the electronic privacy tint. The glass turned opaque gray. He sat at his desk and didn't turn on the lights. The glow of his 3 monitors was enough. He didn't open CAD. He opened the firm's billing portal. Most partners only looked at the top-line numbers. But Lucas knew the structure of the firm better than anyone. He navigated to the vendor list for the Skyline project. He typed in the name of the shell company he had seen on Julian's bank statement. Cicero Logistics. Nothing. Lucas frowned. Robert was too smart to use the same shell company for payroll bribes and project skimming. He had to think like Robert. Where would he hide a handler? Where would he hide Elena? He pulled up the expense reports for the last fiscal quarter. He filtered by client relations. There it was, a recurring monthly payment of $8,500 to a vendor listed as EM Consulting. Elena Marie. He clicked on the invoice details. They were categorized as Interior Design Consultation, Skyline Project. Lucas's breath hitched. Elena wasn't an interior designer. She was an art dealer. She had never consulted on the Skyline project. He cross-referenced the dates. The invoices were approved by R. Vance on the 1st of every month. The same day the mortgage on the penthouse was drafted from Lucas's personal account. It was a salary. Robert was paying Elena a salary out of the project budget to stay married to Lucas. Lucas. The door opened. Lucas didn't jump. He calmly minimized the window, bringing up a 3D rendering of the museum's lobby. He swiveled his chair around. Robert Vance stood in the doorway. He was 60, silver-haired, immaculate in a Tom Ford suit. He looked like a statesman. He looked like a father figure. "I heard you were here," Robert said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. His voice was dripping with rehearsed concern. "Lucas, you shouldn't be working today. Elena called me. She's hysterical." "I bet she is," Lucas said flatly. Robert sighed, sitting on the edge of Lucas's desk, a power move disguised as intimacy. "Look, son, I know what you saw. The photo. It was a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. We were both drunk, and the pressure of the deal—" "Is that what it was?" Lucas asked, locking eyes with the man he had idolized for a decade. "Pressure? These things happen in our world," Robert said, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "Marriages are complicated, but careers, talent like yours, that's rare. Don't throw away the Skyline contract because of a bruised ego. Elena loves you. We can fix this." Lucas looked at Robert's hand resting on the mahogany desk. He imagined smashing it with a T-square, but he didn't. He needed Robert to feel safe. He needed the fox to think the hound was just licking its wounds. "You're right, Robert," Lucas said. The words tasted like bile. "The Skyline project is the most important thing." Robert's shoulders relaxed. He smiled, a flash of white veneers. "That's my boy. Pragmatic. Logical. Go home. Get some rest. We'll talk about the other stuff later. I just need to grab a few files," Lucas said, standing up. "I work better alone." "Take all the time you need." Robert patted his shoulder. "We're a family here, Lucas. Never forget that." Robert left. As soon as the door clicked shut, Lucas plugged his external drive into the USB port. He didn't just download the EM Consulting invoices. He downloaded the entire fiscal history of the Skyline project, every email between Robert and Elena dating back 3 years, and the metadata from the firm's server logs. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 20%, 50%, 80%. He watched the door, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. If Robert came back, if IT flagged the bulk download complete. Lucas yanked the drive out and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He grabbed his coat. He took one last look around the office. The awards on the shelf, the framed photos of him and Elena in Paris. The life he had built. It was all structure without a foundation, and he was about to detonate the charges. The conference room on the 40th floor was a glass cage suspended over the Chicago River. At 10:01 a.m., the light was unforgiving. Robert Vance sat at the head of the long mahogany table, flanked by the firm's legal counsel and, surprisingly, Elena. She sat to Robert's right, wearing a modest navy dress, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Robert had staged this perfectly. He had called it a strategy meeting for the Skyline project, but the presence of Elena made the subtext clear. This was an intervention. They were going to corner Lucas, use the firm's lawyers to pressure him into a quiet settlement, and force a reconciliation narrative to protect the brand. Lucas walked in last. He carried nothing but his laptop. He didn't look at Elena, whose eyes pleaded with him the moment he entered. He didn't look at the lawyers. He walked to the other end of the table, plugged in his HDMI cable, and stood. "Lucas," Robert started, his voice a rich baritone of authority. "Before we review the designs, we need to discuss the personal matters impacting the firm. Elena is here because— I'm glad she's here, Lucas interrupted. His voice was calm, amplified slightly by the room's acoustics. It saves me a subpoena. Robert frowned. Excuse me. The Skyline Project, Lucas said, tapping a key. The projector screen behind him lowered, humming softly. The logo of the museum appeared. We need to discuss the budget overages, specifically the consulting fees. This isn't the time for line items, Lucas, Robert snapped, his patience thinning. We are talking about your marriage. We are talking about the firm's liability, Lucas corrected. He clicked the remote. The screen changed. It wasn't an architectural rendering. It was a spreadsheet. Rows and rows of highlighted data. I noticed a recurring monthly payment of $8,500 to a vendor named EM Consulting, Lucas said, pacing slowly, billed against the Skyline client account for interior strategy, totaling nearly $300,000 over 3 years. The room went dead silent. The lawyer straightened up, his eyes narrowing at the screen. Elena let out a small, strangled gasp. Lucas turned to face them. I checked the vendor registry. EM Consulting is registered to an address in the Gold Coast. Our address, actually. Elena Marie Bennett. He clicked again. Copies of the cashed checks appeared on the screen, signed by Robert Vance, endorsed by Elena Bennett. This is embezzlement, Robert, Lucas said, his voice devoid of emotion. You've been siphoning client funds to pay my wife. Under Illinois law, that's theft by deception. Since the transfers cross state lines via the bank, it's also federal wire fraud. Robert's face turned a violent shade of red. He stood up. That is a private stipend. A bonus structure? It's client money, Lucas shot back, his voice hardening like concrete. You stole from the Skyline Museum to pay for my wife's loyalty, to keep her in my bed so I would stay at your desk. He turned his gaze to Elena. She was trembling, tears streaming down her face. But he felt nothing. No pity, no anger. Just the cold assessment of a structural flaw. And you, Lucas said to her, you're the beneficiary. That makes you an accessory to fraud. The mandatory minimum is 5 years. Lucas, stop! Elena sobbed, reaching out a hand. Please. There is one way out, Lucas said, ignoring her plea and looking at the lawyer, who was now frantically typing on his phone. I have the file, ready to send to the Department of Justice, and to the client. What do you want? Robert hissed, gripping the edge of the table. The statesman was gone. Only the desperate crook remained. I want my name off the firm, Lucas said. I want my intellectual property for the Skyline design released to me solely. And I want a confession. He pointed at Elena. You have 2 choices, Elena. You can go to prison with Robert for fraud, or you can testify that these payments were a salary. You can go on record stating that our marriage was a paid position orchestrated by Robert Vance. You admit that you were an employee, not a wife. I can't, Elena whispered, horrified. That would humiliate me. Everyone would know. Prison is also humiliating, Lucas noted dryly, but the orange jumpsuits are free. He looked at his watch. You have 5 minutes to sign the release of my IP and the separation agreement, or I hit send. The silence that followed was heavy with the sound of empires crumbling. Lucas watched Robert sink back into his chair, defeated. He watched Elena cover her face with her hands. He had demolished the building while they were still inside it. 6 months later, the Chicago winter had thawed into a wet, gray spring. The snow piles were gone, revealing the cracked pavement underneath. It wasn't pretty, but it was real. Lucas stood in the center of a converted warehouse loft in the West Loop. It was nothing like the glass tower on Wacker Drive. The floors were uneven timber, the heating pipes rattled, and the view was of a brick wall across the alley. But the name on the frosted glass door was simple. Bennett Studio. No partners, no associates. Just him. He adjusted the drafting table, the morning light hitting the fresh vellum. For the first time in years, he wasn't designing a monument to someone else's ego. He was sketching a small community library for a suburb on the south side. The budget was tight, the materials modest, but the lines were honest. The buzzer rang. Lucas pressed the release. A minute later, Julian walked in. He looked different. The gray pallor of the attic was gone, replaced by a healthier flush, though the lines around his eyes remained, permanent receipts of the years he had lost. He was holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "Place looks dusty," Julian commented, looking at the exposed rafters. "It's authentic," Lucas replied, taking the coffee. "Thanks." They stood by the window watching a delivery truck navigate the narrow alley. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was just silence. "I heard about Robert," Julian said after a moment. "Settled with the SEC, banned from practicing architecture in Illinois. The firm is being liquidated." "I know," Lucas said. He didn't feel a surge of triumph, just a quiet satisfaction, like checking off a completed item on a punch list. "And Elena?" Julian asked, his voice tentative. "Moved back to Arizona with her parents," Lucas said. "She sent an email last week, asking if we could talk. I deleted it." Julian nodded, staring into his coffee. "I'm sorry, Luke. For everything I still owe you, I don't know how to pay it back." Lucas looked at his brother. He thought about the $50,000. He thought about the years of deception, but then he looked at the blueprint on the table, the structural integrity of a building that would stand on its own, without hidden supports. "You don't owe me," Lucas said. "We were both stuck in a building designed to collapse. You just got out the exit before I did." Julian looked up, surprised. Lucas offered a small, rare smile. "I need a project manager for this library job," Lucas added. "Pay's terrible. Hours are long, but the boss is honest." Julian's eyes misted over. He nodded, unable to speak. "I'll take it." "Good. Start Monday." That evening, Lucas went to dinner alone. He didn't go to the Italian place on Rush Street where the waiters knew his name and the wine list was thicker than a Bible. He went to a small diner on the corner, the kind with vinyl booths and ketchup bottles on the table. He ordered a burger and fries. He sat by the window watching the city lights flicker on. Across the street, he saw a couple walking out of a high-end restaurant. The woman was laughing too loudly, checking her phone. The man looked tired, his eyes scanning the street as if looking for an escape. Lucas took a bite of his burger. It was greasy, hot, and tasted exactly like what it was. His phone sat on the table, silent. No frantic texts from a wife managing his mood. No emails from a boss managing his talent. He was 34 years old. He was divorced. His net worth was a fraction of what it had been a year ago. Ideally, he should have felt lonely. But as he watched the reflection of his own face in the diner window, calm, unhurried, solitary, he realized he wasn't lonely. He was simply unoccupied. For the first time in his life, the foundation was solid, and whatever he built next, he would build it himself.